Hello all, it's Devar Kresniansky from Adai, and today we have Rabbi Shlomo Slatkin, who will be talking about asking for change in your marriage and relationship, and we'll just jump right into the talk. Rabbi Slatkin, can you talk a little bit about your background and the work that you do?
Sure. I'm an LCPC, a licensed clinical professional counselor, a master's in counseling psychology, and I specialize in what's called Imago relationship therapy. I'm a certified Imago therapist, advanced clinician, and workshop presenter. And I've been doing this work. My wife and I started this work about, I would say, about 15 years ago. And then I've been doing the work professionally for over a decade. And I found it's one of the most powerful forms of couples counseling out there. It works where nothing else seems to work for many couples, and I find that it really helps couples be able to create safety so that they can show up in relationship and be there for each other and get out of the stuck places that they've been in for so long, learn how to effectively communicate, and to have a happy relationship together. So I work with couples, and we do work privately with couples with private retreats, and we also do a group retreat based on the Imago book called Getting the Love You Want. It's a worldwide retreat, and we're the only Shomer Shabbos retreat. We do it on Sunday and Monday in the U.S. I'm not sure about in the world, but definitely in the U.S. And we have one coming up Baltimore May 5th and 6th.
That's 2019 for those who are listening to the recording.
19. Right. So we do them quarterly in Baltimore, and we also travel to different communities that bring us out to do them as well.
Okay, great. So tonight we'll be talking about the change request. Can you just talk about very briefly what that is?
Right. So I think you're referring to the behavioral change request. So the behavioral change request is something that it's interesting because everybody wants to come to counseling for change. And it's something that we do in the group workshop. It's one of the exercises that we introduce, and it takes up quite a bit of time actually when we work on it. It's an important exercise. In the private work, actually, I don't find myself doing it so much because I find that the change happens through just the regular Imago dialogue process. I can explain both concepts, but basically the idea is that the behavioral change request takes the dialogue process further by beyond sharing the frustration that you're feeling and talking about what you need. You get a chance in the end to actually ask for some time-limited specific requests related to the need. So it could be like, whereas in a regular conversation, a regular dialogue, we would talk about what we need, but there wouldn't be any obligation for the receiver, the person who's listening, to actually change. That would be up to them, but it wouldn't be any obligation. But the behavioral change requests actually walk out with an obligation, or at least you're making a commitment to do something for a few weeks. And we usually give people a choice. You can't kind of force. You give like 3 different options. So just for example, let's say you don't feel cared about. That's the main need. I don't feel cared about in this relationship. So what are 3 different things that could actionable activities that can be measured for that you could ask your spouse to do? So it could be, for the next 2 weeks, I'd like you to turn off your cell phone when we have dinner. For the next 2 weeks, I'd like you to buy me flowers, Erev Shabbos. So you're giving very specific, measurable things, and you're not asking for permanent change. You're not saying, I would like you never to have your cell phone. When somebody hears that, they're automatically shut down. They're like, no, that's impossible. I can't do it. So give them a bite-sized opportunity to show that they change. And it can be powerful because it helps the person really show that, look, I'm making an effort for you. You see that it's not just talk, they're actually doing something. So that's really the end piece of the behavioral change request, and that's really that behavioral component that we use in the therapeutic process. But I find that a lot of the change happens even without going that far, because when people learn how to have a safe conversation and express their feelings and have their spouse feel compassion for them instead of feeling threatened, their spouse often actually will change for them because they want to change for them, not because they feel forced to or because somebody made a deal and told them that this is what they have to do or give in. It happens very organically. So I'll pause there because I know that was a lot.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back very briefly, talk about what the dialogue looks like, and then we'll build on to this last piece of the behavior change request.
Sure. So the Imago dialogue process is an opportunity to talk about anything that's really meaningful in a relationship. And it can be used in any relationship, not just in a marriage, but it's especially powerful in a marriage because marriage has a unique level of conflict because we really push each other's buttons a lot. So it's especially helpful in a marriage where there's high conflict or just people aren't having an easy time listening to each other. There's a lot of reactivity, defensiveness. So the dialogue process is a very structured process that helps the couple be able to sit down and talk about an issue. And again, it can be something positive, but often people find it most beneficial when you're talking about a frustration to be able to deal with something that a need you're not getting met in a relationship, to share in a safe way instead of kind of blaming your spouse or criticizing your spouse, sharing in a way that your spouse can receive it, and then having your spouse within a structure so that they are not going to get reactive so they can hear your perspective. So just kind of breaking down the different components. The first way that we set up the dialogue, and again, you can use some of these components even if you're not doing the formal process, even if your spouse is not on board, you can use some of these to help make change in your relationship immediately. And the first thing is making an appointment. So I always have couples, even when they're in session, make an appointment to have a dialogue. So you would say, is now a good time to have a dialogue, or I'd like to invite you into my world, is now a good time, whatever you feel more comfortable with. Obviously, if you haven't learned the process together with your spouse, you might say something more casual, like, I'd like to talk to you about something, are you available? And the idea is that you're setting yourself up for success. If you think about it this way, if you're upset about something, what is your ultimate goal? Do you want to just criticize your spouse? Do you want to bash them, make them feel bad, or is there an unmet need that's not getting met in the relationship? And usually it's really the latter. There's something you're hurting because you're in pain and you're frustrated and you act out because there's something you really need and you don't necessarily know how to articulate that. So the best way of getting that need met is to make sure your spouse can actually hear what you have to say. So you want to think about, how can I share it in a way that will be most amenable for them to really receive it and take it to heart. So we start off by making sure the person is available. I think a lot of fights start off because we kind of sideswipe our spouse. We kind of just spring something on them. It comes out of left field, or we criticize them, and automatically we go into our defenses. We get reactive, and of course we can't hear the other person when we're reactive, and we certainly cannot change. So the first thing is make that appointment. Now, if it's not a good time for your spouse, that's also okay. You would like to have a dialogue within 24 hours if possible. If now it's not a good time, because you want to be respectful, because you want to make sure they're listening. So you want to be respectful. Is now a good time? If not, when can we meet? How about after dinner? How about after the kids go to bed, or after the kids leave for school in the morning? Whatever time works, try to schedule something. Sometimes people are really busy. They might have to wait till the weekend. But the idea is you want to make a time so you can sit down and have a calm conversation. Now, the person on the receiving end, if you're doing this with your spouse, there's usually one spouse who would rather never talk about it. So it's really important that you give your spouse, you do make an appointment, meaning you grant their appointment, because they're making a stretch by not unleashing on you in the moment of their emotion. They're making a big stretch by doing that. So you want to make a stretch by making sure you're available. And if you have this safe process, it's going to be easier to be available to hear something, even if you don't really want to hear it. So that's step one, and it's really important to do it because it rewires our brain. It gets us to be more intentional. It helps us realize that our spouse is not an extension of ourselves, but they are an other. They have a different viewpoint, different way of looking at things, different feelings, and we want to be respectful of our spouse and their ability to hear what we have to say. And plus, from a selfish perspective, it's going to help us get what we want if our spouse actually can hear it. So that's the appointment. And then after the appointment is granted, so it's ideal that you should be sitting down, talking to each other face to face, looking in each other's eyes. If you're kind of talking from one room to the other, that's not going to help you connect. And one thing about this process is, again, I said about the safety, and the safety is helping us be able to achieve connection. That's really what we want to have. So if a couple is connected, they're usually able to deal with most of the issues. It's when they're not feeling safe, when they're not feeling connected, it's not the case. So you want to make sure that you're facing each other, you're looking in each other's eyes. It could be hard for a lot of couples. It's something that you don't do. But it really can make a huge difference, and just having that eye contact can really change even the dynamic in the conversation than you would have normally. So it's okay to go on to the next step? Did you have any questions about that? Okay. Okay, so then after that you would say, so after your spouse has granted the request to meet with you, to speak with you, then you could share what you're feeling. So you might want to share in bite-sized pieces, because what we like to do in the dialogue process is what's called mirroring. So the person who's listening is going to repeat back what their spouse said. They're not going to interject. They're not going to agree, disagree, offer their 2 cents, get reactive. They have to just repeat back what was said. And this can be really hard for people, but it's really important because it helps calm us down and it helps our spouse feel heard. So you mirror back. So the spouse would say, I was really frustrated yesterday when you didn't call me when you were coming home late from work. So, of course, the first instinct is, well, I was in a traffic jam, or whatever the excuse you might have. Even if you have a good excuse, even if you're trying to make a situation better, just don't say anything. Just mirror back. What I heard you say is that you're upset because I didn't call you when I was coming home late from work. So just mirroring it back. And again, if you're doing this without your spouse's involvement, you can try to just improvise, say something more naturally. But I'm just kind of showing you with like the strict form that we would do in a session. So you would mirror back, and you would just you would ask, did I get you, meaning did I get it right? And then you would ask, is there more, meaning it's an invitation, is there more that you want to share? And just to explain the mirroring helps in a few different ways. First of all, it helps us really hear what the other person's saying. We all have our own filters. We all have our own way of processing what's going on in the outside of us. So mirroring makes sure we heard it back without interpretation, and that avoids a lot of misunderstanding, miscommunication. It also helps the person feel heard. A lot of times we just need to feel heard. We don't want a solution. We just want to emote and feel that the other person really hears us. And sometimes that's just having yourself being mirrored back is very validating. It's like it's okay for you to have feelings. It's okay for you to have your point of view. And it's a very powerful thing just doing that. And then finally, it helps the receiver, the person who's listening, it helps them calm themselves down. Instead of taking it personally, they mirror back, they reflect what they said, and they deflect almost, so that they don't take it in. So instead of getting reactive and I'm upset, I'm going to say my piece about it, you have a mechanism by which you can take action and really say something to train your brain to be less reactive. So it is repetitive, but the repetition is what helps us rewire our brain, build new neural pathways so that we can become more intentional and not just have these knee-jerk reactions. So we ask, did I get you? If the answer is no, then you would say, what I wanted you to get was this, or you got a lot of it and I wanted you to get this. We're not here to grade people if they did it right or wrong. We're not here to shame. No, you didn't get it right. It's like it's not a test. So we just want to make sure our spouse gets it and share. When you are sharing, you want to share also in a respectful way. So no criticizing, blaming, shaming. You want to use I statements. When you did that, I felt, as opposed to you're good for nothing and you always do this. And you want to say it in a little bit more elevated way, a respectful way. And then that will be easier for your spouse to mirror back. So you mirror back, did I get you, is there more? When there's no more, then you do a summary mirror. You would say, in summary, what I heard you say was X, Y, and Z. Was that a good summary? And that also really helps because when your spouse hears it, not only did you mirror them back throughout, but you actually summarized it. It shows that you really got it, you really were listening. And then you always ask, did I get you, and is there more, just to make sure there's nothing left. Then the other pieces are what we call the validation piece, and that's where you share with your spouse that they make sense. And so I usually keep it simple, and I have people say, what you're saying makes sense, and you make sense. And you want to really say it from a meaningful place, not like you're patronizing them. And making sense does not mean you agree or disagree. Now, you shouldn't say, like, I don't agree with you, but it makes sense. You don't want to imply any disagreement because you're in their space, you're in their world, you're experiencing their reality, which could be completely different from yours. So you're just validating the reality by saying what you're saying makes sense and you make sense, which translates to that your feelings are valid, you have a right to see things from your perspective. And then you would guess what they're feeling. That's we call the empathy stage, where you say, I imagine you're feeling, and pick two feelings, sad and scared. Is that what you're feeling? And they would say yes. And you would say, is there more you're feeling? If there's more, yes, no. And then when I work with a couple, I will help them go through to childhood. So I would help them explore, is there anything about this that makes you feel, that reminds you from childhood? Now, you have to use discretion at home doing that, because if you're not on board with this process, or both people aren't on board, your spouse could feel like you're trying to psychoanalyze them. Like, no, it has nothing to do with my childhood. It has to do with what you did to me yesterday. So obviously you have to come, but it's important just to realize that the issues that are going on, they're usually deeper issues beneath the surface. So anything that really, we say that if it's hysterical, it's historical. Anything that really bothers us is usually coming from a deeper trigger. It's usually from childhood or another, what we call a traumatic experience. Even if your childhood was not traumatic, children do not have the ability to distinguish between, they don't have DAS, so they can't distinguish. Let's imagine if they see their parents yelling and they're 3 years old. So they might think that they're upset with them. They can't make that distinction as an older child or as an adult would be able to. So that itself can imprint negative messages on the child and can give, it can feel like, I would say, like a traumatic experience because it stays with them. So even if you had like an okay childhood, your parents are not perfect, and there are always things that you could have gotten more of. We're not here to blame parents, but we're here to take that information to help us understand what's going on in the here and now. And we find that most of the main issues in relationships are really re-triggering old childhood trauma. And that's why we say that marriage is the unfinished business of childhood, and it's for the purpose of growth and healing. So when we get to the childhood piece, it can be very powerful because it helps a spouse feel compassion for the other and helps them realize that it's really not about me. We call it the 90-10 rule. It's 10% about what I did to you, but it's 90% about what it's evoking from your childhood. So I don't need to be defensive because the intensity of this is because of your own baggage that you bring. Again, I would not recommend saying that to somebody like, yeah, I realize it's like your issue, not mine. No, you want to come from a place of compassion, but it helps you realize if you can understand that when your spouse is upset with you, that yes, there is something that you need to take responsibility for and maybe do differently. But the intense emotion and upset is usually their own issue. And then you can hear it from a non-reactive perspective. And then when you're not reactive, you're more likely to change. Because if you're just reacting, you can't feel safe enough to change. You're just busy putting up a wall and protecting yourself. But if there's no wall, you can be there for your spouse. So we see that a lot of change happens by going through this process, because once a couple can talk about an issue, and instead of being in their reactive part of their brain, they become part of their conscious brain, they're able to find ways to change the situation. They either become more resourceful on their own, they realize, oh, you know what, I realized this wasn't such a big issue. I know I got so stuck because it was triggering me from my childhood that I couldn't even think about any other options, but I can solve the problem myself, or it doesn't bother me anymore. Or your spouse who hears the pain could say, you know what, I realize that it's a big issue for you. I'm going to be more sensitive to not trigger you. Or they both kind of become more resourceful and figure out kind of middle way to work. But when couples are in conflict, they're not able to come up with any solutions. And that's why I would say a lot of marriage counseling is not effective, because if it's just solution oriented and it's not focusing on changing the dynamic of the relationship and creating safety, connection, and trust, then the couple is not really it's going to be hard to change. I mean, you can force people to change, you can make a deal or make them compromise, but usually it doesn't last. It usually leads to resentment. And this way, the change just happens because the couple wants to change. And so I've seen people come up with have issues for 20, 30, 40 years, and they have one dialogue, and it just opens their eyes. They see it in a whole new way. They see a whole new possibility. Now, obviously, it's not magic. You have to put in the work. A couple has to be committed, but it really can do a lot to change, because when your brain is not in reactivity mode, then you can be much more resourceful and come up with the solutions that you had inside of you that you never even knew of before. So I'll pause there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a lot about the dialogue and triggers. Let's build on from the dialogue. So now that we have the understanding, at least, of the skills of the dialogue, let's talk a little bit about the kind of language you would use specifically for the behavior request.
So the behavior request, so we would go through the whole dialogue. We have a form where there's some specific things you would say, like when you did this, I felt this. We have a flow chart that we teach couples, at least in the workbooks in the workshop. You would say, you would talk about the triggering incident, what hurt me about this, the story I tell myself about this, how I react when you do this. So it gives you a little bit of a blueprint. You go to childhood, you share about the need that you had, and then we would say, I would guide them through, or if they already know they're doing the process, it's one thing, but if the therapist guides them through the process, they would share with them and say, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask your spouse for something related to this need. I want you to pick three SMART requests, so specific, measurable, specific requests, not just some amorphous thing that you'll be nice to me. What does that look like specifically? Something that we can measure, something that's, it's relevant to the goal, something that's time-bound. So just give them that introduction. I want you to pick 3 things that your spouse can do. So, for example, for the next 2 weeks, I would like you to put your phone down or turn your phone off at dinner. And you would say the 3 things, and then your spouse would get to pick which one. They would say, the gift I'd like to give you is, now I'm going to turn off my phone for the next 2 weeks. Some of them will be harder than others. So we just want to be, and it might feel like, they're just taking the easy way out. They're doing the one that I really don't care if they do. Pick 3 things that you do care about, that you would like them to do. But the idea is that you want to, it's kind of like baby steps. If you feel like your spouse is very resistant to change, if you're able to at least give them the opportunity to prove themselves and feel like they can do something and be consistent about it, then it leads to more. So just an example, in the Imago, in the Getting Love You Want book by Dr. Harville Hendricks, he talks about this exercise, and he talks about, I don't remember all the details, but the gist of it was that there was a couple that were sleeping in 2 separate rooms, and the behavioral change request was that for the next 2 weeks, the spouse would come back to the room. And after the 2 weeks, the spouse said, you know what, this isn't so bad after all. I think I'll stay. So you see that if you ask someone to do something that seems like so far out, like, I want you to move back into the room, it might be hard for them to comply, obviously depending on what the issue is and the resistance. But if you ask for something doable for 2 weeks, okay, 2 weeks is not a big deal, I can do 2 weeks. Then once the resistance goes away and they see that they're capable of doing it, they realize that they often continue doing that behavioral change because they know it's important to their spouse. So we're really just working with the person, working with the resistance, with the fear, with the threat that they feel, so that they can get to a place where they can feel safe enough. And I find that if couples are safe enough and connected, that they'll do anything for their spouse, assuming that they care for them in the first place, which most people have at some point in their marriage.
So what are some wrong ways to avoid asking this request?
Wrong ways? Well, not in the context of the dialogue, or?
Well, yeah, even in the context, there are some words that we may default to, but with the skills of learning how to do the dialogue, we would do better. So what are some of the wrong ways that some people still, as they're learning to do this request, what are some things they should not be doing anymore?
Well, focus on what you want, not what you don't want. So, if you say, I don't want you to sleep in every morning and miss Minion, that's not really, flip it around. I'd like you to go to 8 o'clock chakras every day or for 2 weeks or something like that. And again, it doesn't have to be that example, but the point is that you see the difference. It's it's one thing is a negative way of looking at it, what you're doing wrong. Another thing is what you want. What is it you want? It's not that you don't want your spouse to sleep in. It's you want him to go to shul. So flip it around and reframe it and make it positive. I mean, whether you're doing this process or any request you're asking, don't, because when you do it from a negative perspective, there can be a little bit of shame attached to that. It's like you're making them feel bad, or it feels negative, it feels critical. So ask for what you want as opposed to what you don't want. That's one thing that you can do. And then, of course, you want to say it in a nice way without laced with any negativity or sarcasm. Like, I'd like you to finally, I don't know, I'd like you to finally wash the dishes, wash the dishes for once, right, for the next 2 weeks, because you never do. Take all that negativity that's laced in there. It's toxic. So just take it out. Just think, what is it that you really want from your spouse? And just ask them from a place of love. And I realize that people are in really, really frustrating and painful situations. And every marriage is different, so we can't, I can't, but I do believe that if a couple can work together to create a more positive and a healthier environment, and also kind of deal with some of this underlying negativity, you can be able to get to a place where you can have these type of conversations.
I guess that's another benefit of the appointment, is that you get yourself into the frame of mind instead of just blurting it out in sense of anger.
Right. That's exactly, for the person that we call them the maximizer or the Hellstorm. For that person who would rather just dump and emote whenever they want to, it is a stretch. It's an exercise in restraint by making that appointment, because it's not their instinct. So.
What's the balance between accept me as I am and making a request? Like someone who's just maybe a night owl and works other hours and shachas at 8 o'clock. Oh, well, not such a great example, but right. This is who I am.
Right. So obviously, you don't want to give your spouse the feeling that you only care about them if they are a certain way. That you want to love your spouse unconditionally. At the same time, you can express your needs, and now it doesn't. And it could be that there are ways that your spouse can stretch. So, it's not all black and white. Meaning, it's not like, okay, I go to bed at 1 o'clock and you go to bed at 11 o'clock, and I really want to go to bed at the same time. So because I'm a night owl, that's just the way I am. Like, that's just, I'm not going to change. So just accept me for that. So you can't go in with the intention that the person is going to change, but you can express your feelings, and it could be that your spouse will be willing to make an effort to go to bed a little earlier, or maybe like a few nights a week earlier. So which might be hard for them, or maybe they will eventually see the benefit of going to bed at the same time. So there are a lot of things that can change if you ask from a place of your needs. What is it that I want, as opposed to focusing? I think we focus too often on the frustration, and which comes out as a criticism or negativity or just nagging. It doesn't help our spouse to want to change. So the more that we can ask for what we need, which is really underneath that frustration, it's an underlying need. It's the frustration is the tip of the iceberg, but what we really want is what's underneath. Whether we can do that, then, and also going in with no expectations. I'm just sharing my feelings. I'm no expectations. Of course, I would like you to be like me or do what I want you to do, but it's, obviously it depends on what the issue is. I mean, there can be, like, if there's certain really destructive behaviors. Let's say somebody's doing drugs, and you say, well, that's who I am. Like, accept me for my habit, or else, that's, you can still have a dialogue about it for sure. But obviously in that situation, I'm not saying just accept it as it is. If it's something that is dangerous or bothers you to that extent, but they're all different degrees of things that we don't like about our spouse.
So to that, it's not something that the spouse who is being requested of, if it's not something that they are ready to take on, they do have the right to say, not now, not yet, not ever.
I mean, you can't you can't force a person to do anything. I mean, you have to lead by example, and marriage is about giving to the relationship, is about giving to another person, is about stretching beyond your comfort zone. It's not about what can I get out of this relationship, but what can I give to this relationship. So it's kind of like the relationship's kind of like the third entity. It's like the space in between the couple. That's Shechina Shroi B'neihem. It's making that space, that holy space for the relationship, and it's not about one person's will or the other. So ideally, if I'm teaching Chassan and Kala class or something like that, ideally, yes, you want to go in with that mindset of I want to be able to give, and I want to be able to stretch and grow and go beyond my comfort zone, and do things that maybe I'm not used to doing certain things, but I'm going to do it for the sake of the relationship. Unfortunately, some people have a harder time doing that, and it's and they don't want to change, or maybe there's something that's really important to them. So you have to figure out the different gradations of what the issue could be. But one thing, it's also helpful to understand, why is it that it bothers you so much? Obviously it would bother anyone if their spouse is taking drugs, but most people, I would say. But what bothers you so much that he sleeps in? The more that you can get out of that, and again, I'm not saying it's okay to sleep in, but the more you can get out of that place of, I'm so uptight about it, I'm so distressed about this issue that I can't even think straight about it, then I'm not going to be able to, I won't be able to convey it in a healthy way. But if I can be conscious about where it's coming from, it reminds me of, my mother always nagging my father, or whatever it is, or some deeper issue, that will help you feel better about it or understand why it bothers you, so it won't bother you as much. And then also, when your spouse hears it, they might be a little bit more sensitive. Whereas if they just take it as a personal criticism or a personal preference, they're not necessarily as willing to stretch, because they might feel defensive. It's like, what are you going to do for me? Like, I'm going to change this thing for you. What are you going to do for me? People like to keep score. So the more they can understand, it gets them to a place of compassion to understand the story, then the easier it is. So just to summarize, the idea of accepting people for who they are, you can't go in with any expectations, but the more that you can express understand yourself why it bothers you, and evoke that compassion from your spouse, I think it will help deal with a lot of those issues that seem to really kind of get stuck and go nowhere.
Well, let's just go with this, waking up morning thing. Let's say you come from two different family backgrounds, and in your family, everyone is very industrious, and everyone was up at 6 o'clock, and that's how you think people are productive. And in his family, they accomplished, a decent amount, and they woke up at 8 o'clock. So it's really two different value systems. So your expectation or your desire or your need is different from his value system. So I'm guessing that in this conversation, you can actually see that what you need is not necessarily the only way to see the world. So he doesn't really have to do that change if he can help you see differently. Or is that a different conversation?
If you both can understand each other's perspective, either way, I mean, you can both appreciate each other's perspective. So instead of feeling like it's a power struggle between the two of you, I want you to wake up and you don't want to wake up. If you start understanding where we're coming from, where both people are coming from, then it makes it easier. First of all, it makes it easier to come to a solution. It could be at some time that it could be the wife wouldn't bother her anymore as much because she realizes where he's coming from. It could be that he makes an extra effort. It could be that it's like a little bit of, like, he's more mindful of it and she's less triggered by it, and then it becomes less of an issue, and maybe he starts waking up more earlier because he sees the value in it. So that's how it can shift, just by understanding, but by having that, again, and it's from in a calm and connected place, as opposed to getting stuck in the conflict. You're seeing the big picture, and that helps people be able to move forward.
Mm-hmm. What if the request is something that there's no best way to say without slightly hurting the other person. Like, I don't like the way you dress, or you have body odor, or I don't know, something like that. How can you ask that, or do you have to just say it as, a little bit of hurt may happen in order to get that request out?
I think it depends on what it is. If it's just like, I don't like the way you're dressed because, it's like you're commenting on your wife's fashion choices. Like, I don't really know if that's, as long as it's obviously with, in terms of sneeze, that's like your personal value system of what's appropriate to wear and not. That's something that there's another discussion that, you can have a dialogue about. But just to say, like, I don't like that skirt on you. I think it's kind of like, let's say it can feel, I would say, I think a lot of women, they feel like it sounds controlling when a man tells them how to dress.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's really necessarily productive. Why is it bothering you so much? Maybe, if there were a way to have a safe conversation and say, look, I really like it when you, wear X, Y, and Z, or these types of clothes. You look really great in it. Or focus on praising your spouse when they're wearing what you like, as opposed to picking on them when they're wearing what you don't like. So focus on that your husband doesn't tuck his shirt in, telling when he does, praising him. If it's a really huge issue for you, if you can say it in a nice way, not like you look like a slob every time you walk out and I'm so embarrassed of you. You can say it more like, I really want to take pride in our family and you represent us, and I feel that, you're so handsome. It would mean a lot to me if you would, tuck your shirt in and comb your hair before you go out in the morning. If it's coming from a loving place, it can be received much easier. Now, it depends. You have to know what the issue is. If it's a weight issue, that's, that can be a little bit tricky. And unless you really are concerned about your spouse's health, people go crazy over these things. Even though, like, if someone's like a little bit chubby, some guys will make a big deal about it, and because they have whatever image they think that their wife should look like, and a lot of it's based on whatever society says. So I think weight is a huge issue and unless you're really worried about your spouse's health, I personally think harping on it, making a big deal about it, is probably not a positive thing for your relationship. I'm just saying in general, body odor. Yeah, if it really bothers you, again, saying it, don't feel like, you smell so horrible, or like recoil when you're around them. To have a conversation, sit them down, and tell them, start off with something positive, how much you love them, and, I just want to let you know, you might not notice this, but I feel like, a lot of times you smell bad, or your body odor bothers me, and I'm wondering if there's anything we can do. Would you like a deodorant or something? You could say it in a...
don't not say it just because it's a little bit hurtful, or there's no easiest way to say it, if it really bothers you.
Yeah, something like that. If you can't get beyond it, those types of things can really... some people are very sensitive to smell. It can really, repulse someone and affect someone in a very negative way, and it just have a negative impact in their relationship, especially in terms of intimacy. And so I think it is something that can be said, as long as it's said with tact and in a safe way, and prefacing it with something positive, so it doesn't look like you're embarrassing them.
Mm-hmm.
And saying it privately, obviously.
Yeah, obviously privacy.
Yeah.
What if the spouse does agree to this short-term change but doesn't actually pull through? How and what should the requesting spouse say?
Like, let's say they did it for a few weeks and then they stopped.
Or they did it
forever,
for 2 days, and they did it for 2 days out of the 2 weeks, and then found either two scenarios actually. One, they just didn't continue, or one, I really don't like this change. It's too hard for me. It's too much for me.
Yeah. So one thing is praise them when they do it. Notice when they do it. Catch them when they're doing something right. So that will definitely help encourage them to do it. If they're doing it but more sporadically. If they're like it's just too hard to do, you can always have another dialogue about it. It's not that you talk about it one time and it goes away. Sometimes you have to revisit, especially if it's really an ingrained pattern. It's like somebody that's late all the time. They're not going to all of a sudden, after one dialogue, for the rest of their life be punctual if they have a habit of being late. I mean, they definitely can make more of an effort, but a lot of times people go back to default, and so it is possible. So you just have to bring it up more. Sometimes I find that it doesn't bother people as much once they have the dialogue about it. So if I have an issue with my spouse being late, and I talked about it, it won't even, and I felt heard and validated. Even if it happens, it might be easier for me to overlook it, especially if I realize that it's my own issue. And then sometimes you just have to realize that right now it's just things aren't going to. This is not necessarily going to change. And is this something that is a deal breaker for me in the relationship? Can I live with it? And just work on finding what's right with the relationship and building the positive in the relationship. And then as that happens, eventually you can revisit the issue and talk about it again. And many times that's a good way to get to see change. Meaning it might just your relationship is able to do it, but it could be in the future they will. So it's just important to keep the connection, keep the positivity.
And here's a slightly different question. What if there's a request, and I'm just going to say the requester is the wife, just because I'm the female here. If the requester is the wife, and she asks him for a change, and he wants to explain his rationale and his understanding or his upbringing or whatever it is, or why he does it the way he does it, where and when is there a place for that? Right there in the conversation?
Yeah, so it's not always a good idea to do it then because it looks like, well, I'm just here, I wanted to tell you why it's so hard for me. So there's two different options. The best option is not to talk about it right now because it might feel like you're kind of reacting to what your spouse said. So you would just wait, let's say give it some time, wait a day or two and say, I want to just let you know why it's so hard for me to do what you asked, even though let's say I'm going to do it or try to do it. I will definitely be more mindful, but I want to know why. I want you to know why it's so hard for me. It's not that I'm doing it on purpose. It's just really hard because of, what X, Y, and Z. Another option is just you can ask at the time, would it be okay, again, if it's not from, it doesn't seem reactive, like, do you mind if I share with you where I'm coming from around this issue, or do you mind if I share with you why it's so hard for me? And if your spouse says no, then I would not share at that time. I sometimes have people that they're doing the dialogue and they'll say like, okay, when's my turn to say my side? So it shows that they weren't really listening. So because they're too defensive, so they didn't fully cross the bridge to their spouse's world. So we want them to really hear what the other person has to say, and if they do defend themselves or give their explanation, it can be counterproductive and just kind of invalidate everything that they did because it makes your spouse feel like you weren't really listening, you're just thinking of your defense. So in the spirit of what we're trying to achieve, it's usually better not to do it right away. If it seems calm and if you're not reactive and you're not like, feeling just like this urge to defend yourself, then you could respond, provided that your spouse agrees to listen to it. If they say no, then you just choose to respond at a different time when things are calmer or more connected.
And this question came in. I would like my spouse to be more expressive, and he does agree that he should be more expressive. He just doesn't know how. Mm-hmm. And I guess I can just build on that. If the spouse says, "I'd like to do that for you, but I need your support and I need your patience as I learn this," especially expressiveness. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Well, I mean, I think that's fair to say that, it's hard for me. Can you help me? I think that what you can do is you don't want to have to coach your spouse or how to be expressive, but you could say this is give some examples of what this would look like. It's not just an amorphous thing I'd like you to be more expressive. What does that mean? So what that would look like would be that, when I get dressed up, you make a nice comment about how I look, or you compliment me on the dinner, or you tell me that you love me. It's specific things, and then now obviously when it comes to emotions, they can say the challenges. They can say what you want them to say, but is it going to come from are you going to sense the feeling behind it? And that's the challenge. If someone's not expressive, if they don't feel it, it's hard for them to say that. But I think the more you can give examples of what you would like, it's much easier for your spouse to be able to do it. And it's important to be patient. Yeah.
Even if as they're learning, and even if it's difficult, it doesn't seem to come off your tongue easily. It can come off your tongue more easily with a little bit of practice. So it's worth going through the few awkward beginnings to get there.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also, again, with everything, why do you have a hard time being expressive? I mean, not to interrogate your spouse, but be worthwhile exploring. I mean, a lot of times we learn growing up that certain things, for a lot of men specifically, sharing your emotions is not necessarily something that's looked upon in a positive way, or it may even be shunned in society or in our particular household. So there are reasons why people cut off certain parts of themselves. So that need of your spouse for that expression is actually for your own benefit to kind of reclaim that part of yourself that's not integrated into your personality.
I'm actually finding it interesting that there are some women who are not expressive because they don't want to show that they need somebody in their life. So that's interesting from a different angle.
Yeah. And there's usually a story behind, why is that? Why is it not safe to be why is it not safe to be vulnerable? Why is it not safe to need? Why you have to be why are you trying to protect yourself from getting hurt? Where is that coming from? And this is also an interesting thing to observe.
Right, and then you could have just a dialogue around it. And just keep the change request separate from it. Just try to help them understand themselves.
Yeah, without any intention of changing anything, just to explore.
Yeah, and it might be interesting to use a professional to help really explore a little bit further, because it's helpful to the couple if this whatever it is expressed and shared and understood by both. So
it's hard, and you have professional help can guide you on the right, to explore it deeper.
Okay, this is great. I think we covered most of the questions that came in. We just kind of wove it into the conversation.
Okay.
Let me just see if anything else came in. No, I think that we covered most of the questions. Some of the other questions were too specific, and we'll just try to address them in some other way. So once again, thank you so much. And here's another opportunity to shout out about your May event. Go ahead.
Sure.
May 2019.
So if you really want to learn, get a crash course in these skills, then the Getting the Love You Want workshop that we have May 5th and 6th, 2019 in Baltimore is a great way to learn the dialogue process, to start the ball rolling and be able to have the skills. And it's amazing. We heard from someone told me that a couple that they sent to the workshop we did this fall, they didn't do any follow-up sessions afterwards. They just worked on it themselves, and they're really in a great place because of that. So it can really give you the needed skills to make a big shift in your relationship. Our website's themarriagerestorationproject.com, themarriagerestorationproject.com. So you can find out more information about the group workshop, also our private retreats, and we do have an online marriage school, we call it, and that course is also something that you can do in the privacy of your own home, either with your spouse or by yourself, and you can see videos and audios to learn more about the dialogue process. My wife and I do a bunch of demos also. So if you're interested in learning it more, that's also another resource that could be helpful.
And your periodic emails are very helpful also. So it's worth
Thank you.
subscribing to your emails.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you very much, Rabbi Slatkin. This is really, really informative. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye
Take care.
all.